Look at that. So everything here would have to be safety. I mean, we're spending money and we haven't even made it into the house yet.
Drew Scott spent 20 years being the calm one, the man with the number, the plan, the steady voice that made impossible budgets feel manageable. Millions of viewers watched him work across hundreds of episodes of one of television's most durable home renovation franchises, and what they saw was always the same: composure, precision, a kind of unshakable reliability. Then, at 47, he said something that stopped people cold. Not a scandal, not a dramatic confession, just a quiet admission that made audiences look twice at someone they believed they already understood. To grasp why that moment hit the way it did, you have to go back to where it all started, long before the cameras, long before the real estate empire, back to Vancouver and a down payment of $250. Born in 1978, Drew Scott grew up in Vancouver, Canada, as the twin brother of Jonathan Scott, in a household where waiting around simply wasn't modeled as an option. Their father Jim had worked as a stuntman before becoming a youth counselor, and their mother Joanne practiced law, and between those two worlds, physical fearlessness and structured discipline, the boys absorbed something that no classroom could have taught them as efficiently. Jim had a specific philosophy about earning. Don't lecture your sons about money. Put opportunity in front of them and let them figure it out. What Drew and Jonathan figured out as young boys was Jam Enterprises, a small operation where they manufactured nylon clothes hangers and sold them locally. The money covered education costs and sports equipment, and the experience planted something in Drew that would never quite leave him: the understanding that value doesn't appear, it gets built. Basketball looked like Drew's future during his years at Thomas Haney Secondary School, where his athletic ability and academic consistency made him one of the more recognizable students on campus. A knee injury erased that path without warning, and that's when Drew did something that turned out to define him more than the sport ever could have. He looked for a different way forward without spending much time grieving the one that closed. At 18, pooling together $250 with Jonathan, Drew bought their first house, renovated it with his own hands, rented it out, and eventually sold it at a profit that genuinely surprised them both. That transaction became his real education. Years later, he put it plainly: he didn't want to rely on luck. He wanted to understand how value was created. Kinesiology at the University of Calgary came next, running alongside a growing real estate operation that Drew approached with the same methodical thinking he applied to everything. The model was straightforward: find older homes, renovate, resell at a higher price. But the execution reflected a discipline that separated him from people doing the same thing by feel alone. Acting classes in Vancouver ran parallel to all of it, driven by a genuine creative impulse he had carried for years. Small roles in productions like Smallville and The X-Files followed, and standing on those sets taught him something that would prove worth more than any acting credit: that effective communication on camera isn't performance, it's clarity, and the person watching needs to feel spoken to directly. The artistic path carried a steep price. Several years of pursuing both acting and real estate simultaneously left Drew more than $100,000 in debt, the result of overinvesting in one direction while the other couldn't fully compensate. None of that was comfortable to sit with for someone who prided himself on sound planning, and that discomfort became fuel. Returning to real estate with complete focus, he built Scott Real Estate Inc., a brokerage where negotiations and client relationships were handled with a transparency that earned a fast reputation across multiple regions. A frustrating experience with a negligent intermediary had pushed him to obtain his own brokerage license, and that decision, to take direct control rather than trust the process to someone else, would repeat itself throughout his career whenever something genuinely important was on the line. By 2007, Drew and Jonathan were expanding operations into Las Vegas, and the shift toward television began taking shape from that foundation. What they were doing every day, finding properties, wrestling with budgets, walking families through the gap between what they wanted and what was actually possible, turned out to be exactly what a large television audience needed to see. Property Brothers premiered on HGTV in 2011, with Jonathan managing construction and creative direction, while Drew handled the financial reality, the negotiating, the budget conversations, the careful management of expectations. None of that was performed for the camera. It was simply what Drew had been doing for years, now in front of an audience of millions. He once described the show's purpose as helping people understand that a home isn't just a place to live, but the result of hard work and real vision, and that framing elevated what could have been a standard renovation format into something audiences felt personally invested in. The show became a genuine phenomenon, and faster than almost anyone in production had anticipated. Viewers connected with the renovations certainly, but what kept them watching was the dynamic between two brothers who disagreed productively, respected each other visibly, and never seemed to lose sight of the families at the center of each project. Drew's on-screen composure read as grounding rather than cold. He was the one who delivered hard truths about costs and timelines while somehow making people feel more confident rather than less. And behind the camera, his role in Scott Brothers Entertainment expanded steadily alongside his television presence. Production schedules, content direction, brand consistency across multiple series. Colleagues described him as someone who knew precisely when to push forward and exactly when to stop to protect what was being made. That quality kept Property Brothers alive through a television environment where reality programming typically peaked early and collapsed shortly after. Property Brothers at Home arrived in 2014, giving viewers a closer look at Drew and Jonathan working on a house in Las Vegas for themselves, navigating the same creative friction that homeowners on the show dealt with weekly. A year later, Scott Living launched as a furniture brand built around modern, functional design, quickly reaching major retail stores across the United States and Canada. Drew wasn't a passive name attached to a product. He was directly involved in development decisions and retail partnerships, and the brand reflected his consistent aesthetic. Practical, built for real life rather than visual display. In 2016, he and Jonathan co-authored Dream Home, a guide walking readers through the entire process of choosing and renovating their ideal space. And that same year, Drew released a country-influenced single called Hold On, which charted on the Billboard Country chart. Music, he said, helped him maintain positive energy through an overwhelming workload, and whether or not a recording career was ever seriously on the table, the release confirmed that his creative range extended well beyond a single format. Dancing with the Stars in 2017, alongside dancer Emma Slater, produced a fourth-place finish that required something more than celebrity participation. It required genuine commitment, public vulnerability, and the willingness to fail repeatedly in front of an audience until the work improved. Viewers responded to what they saw, and it wasn't a television persona they were watching. That same year deepened his public reach well beyond the home renovation audience. Then, in 2018, Drew married Linda Fan in Italy. The ceremony filmed for a TLC special called Drew and Linda Say I Do. Linda's role extended far beyond the personal. She became actively integrated into Scott Brothers Entertainment, contributing to product design, event planning, and brand content development. Their partnership completed something in the image Drew had been building for years, a man who had found a way to construct something real in both dimensions of his life at the same time. The Forever Home series, launched in 2019, marked a deliberate shift in philosophy. Rather than sourcing new properties, the show centered on helping families transform homes they were already emotionally attached to, honoring the genuine complexity of the choice to stay and renovate, rather than sell and start fresh. Drew managed the financial and purchasing side of each project, and the show's reception confirmed what his entire career had demonstrated. Audiences trusted him because he had never given them a reason not to. When filming was disrupted in 2020, the Scott Living furniture line expanded online, and the new collection became a bestseller, which reflected a professional habit that 2 decades of managed pressure had reinforced. Finding the productive direction when circumstances force a stop rather than treating stillness as lost time. Around that same period, Drew and Linda received news that they were expecting their first child, and his response to that was characteristically brief and precise. The greatest achievement is coming home knowing that everything you do is for them. Parker James Scott arrived in 2022, and Drew consciously reduced his workload, delegating operational responsibilities he had previously kept close. Property Brothers continued without disruption, but his relationship to the pace of his own schedule had shifted in ways that were genuine rather than strategic. In 2023, the show reached more than 10 years of continuous broadcasting, a milestone few reality programs ever reach, and Drew marked it not with celebration, but with gratitude, saying that every project reminded him how much the audience's trust meant and how little he had taken it for granted. When 2024 arrived, the announcement that drew more attention than almost anything else in Drew Scott's career landed not with drama, but with plainness. He reduced his workload to be present for his family, including the arrival of his and Linda's second child, and wrote publicly that family is the foundation upon which everything else makes sense. That line traveled far because of who was saying it and what he was visibly setting aside in order to mean it. A man who had spent 2 decades building one of television's most durable brands in the home improvement and real estate space was choosing, deliberately and without apology, to let the pace slow down, and audiences recognized the weight of that choice. By 2025, a new Scott Living collection built around natural materials and family-centered spaces had launched through smaller, quieter events that reflected a broader shift in how Drew approached his public presence. Charitable work around affordable housing and children's educational funds increased, with all donations publicly disclosed and directed straight to communities that needed them. Before the year closed, he wrote that it was a time to rebalance, that he wanted more of his attention going toward what truly mattered. No elaboration followed, and none was needed. Drew Scott's story, taken in full, isn't really about television ratings or the empire two brothers assembled from a $250 down payment. What it traces is something quieter. A person who learned early that value has to be created with intention, who overcame a $100,000 debt and a failed acting pursuit to build something lasting, who expanded relentlessly and then, at the moment when most people at that level would push harder, chose depth over scale. At 47, he carries the settled confidence of someone with nothing left to prove, and the audience that watched him negotiate impossible budgets on screen for over a decade watched him make the same calculation in his own life, recognizing what it cost and what it was worth.